Hello, everybody. I'm Braden Madarsky, and on today's episode of our Poets of Paradox podcast, I'll talk about Emily Dickinson's poetry and how she wrote about death. Now, death is not an easy topic to discuss and can be confusing to understand. Dickinson, however, provides us with an insight to how death can help us live our own lives. It's a lot more complicated than just being, Dickinson's sheer obsession with death makes her so unique. Originally, I would think of her writing as Wednesday from the Addams Family if she wrote poetry. But her writing represents so much more than that. Now, how does one become so fascinated with the deceased? Well, one way would be to live in a house with a window overlooking the town cemetery, with a perfect viewing of every funeral ever held in town. And of course, one would need some people to die. Luckily, Dickinson's hometown of Amherst, Massachusetts graciously provided both bodies and that home. Alfred Habiger, a former University of Kansas professor, attributes these deaths to what was known as the season of dying. In 1842, the dying began with two small children. The following years saw the deaths of multiple Amherst women, some being Dickinson's friends' mothers. She saw her friend and cousin die at the age of just 15. And in 1844, a family friend committed suicide. She was surrounded by death. Dickinson herself noted how no verse in the Bible has frightened me so much from a child as "from him that hath not shall be taken even that he hath." Was it because its dark menace deepened our own door? Here, Dickinson expresses her discomfort with death. She did not enjoy it. Rather, she was completely astounded by the immensity of dying, the finality of that last breath we take. And her poetry reflects these mixed feelings. One line from her poem, "If I Should Die," reads, "'Tis sweet to know that stocks will stand when we with daisies lie, that commerce will continue, and trades as briskly fly." Here, Dickinson isn't worried about death. She actually is content with knowing that nothing will be affected when she dies. Yet when compared to her other poem, she seems totally afflicted by somebody's death, or in this case, a little both, being lost at sea. "Adrift, a little boat adrift, and night is coming down. Will no one guide a little boat unto the nearest town?" She's worried this ship will sink and those aboard will drown into the abyss, losing their lives. She doesn't care that nothing will change for her. She still worries about this boat. Her fickle fear, fascination, and disregard of death adds to the complexities in Dickinson's poems. You never know which Dickinson you're going to get until you read that last line of her poem. This gives all of her poems that same sense of uneasiness. And she actually builds this uneasiness even more with slant rhymes. Dickinson will write two lines that end with words that sound okay when they are rhymed together. This gives a dissonance to the poem that adds more to the uncertainty of death. These lines come from her poem "Forever is Composed of Now," and it exemplifies her expert use of the slant rhyme. She writes, "Without certificate or pause, or celebrated days, as infinite our years would be as anno Domini's." In this instance, she rhymes days with domininis. I'm sure when you tried to read the lines out loud in your head, your brain subconsciously tried to make the words rhyme. That dominies ended up sounding a lot more like dominaes. But we can't change the sounds of these words. Dickinson deliberately chooses to make her readers uncomfortable because of our own discomfort in talking about death. We feel that it's better for us to not worry about our own deaths. Otherwise, we live our lives covered in bubble wrap. Dickinson embraces this fact and forces us to get out of our comfort zones and face death head on. And I'm also sure that you noticed the ABCB rhyme scheme that she uses in her poems. The first and third lines don't rhyme, yet the second and fourth lines do. This conventional rhyming style evokes an imbalance within the poem. And Dickinson no doubt uses this imbalance to her advantage, providing us with an even more uncomfortable reading about death and dying. The adding of slant rhymes makes an already imbalanced ABCB poem into a harsh jumble of words that make fingernails on screeching on a chalkboard sound better. She felt that the only way to tell if a poem is good is to ask whether after reading it you feel like the top of your head has been taken off. Ouch. She wanted people to dig deeper into the uncertainty of death in her poetry and expose themselves to the cruel reality of our own lives and the mortality that we have. But even with all of this death, Dickinson's religion surely should have given her some solace. She was raised on the foundations of the Puritans, after all. Did heaven not soothe her soul and mind from the fears of death? Well, see, that's where things become interesting. Her whole life, Emily Dickinson held an off and on relationship with God. That was until Calvinists came to Amherst, imitating the great Jonathan Edwards. Their fiery words about how only a chosen few were granted access to heaven and angered Dickinson. She argued that Jesus allowed everybody into his kingdom. Here, she became confused in her faith. Dickinson began to question if God really could and would save everybody from death. This resulted in a lot of her poetry to either be for religion, against religion, or just confused about religion. No doubt this influenced her thoughts on an afterlife and exactly what happens to you after you die. Whew, that was a lot of explaining Dickinson's style and thoughts on death. I'm sure you may be feeling a bit skeptical about the true power of Dickinson's writing, and that I've just been yapping on and on about some random woman who really just seems to be a 19th century Debbie Downer. To this I say, nay, nay. In order to fully understand the importance of Dickinson's themes and style, we have to see her stuff in action. So today, I'll quickly read you her poem, Elysium is as Far as Two. This specific poem encompasses everything that Dickinson stands for as a poet. Also, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. It goes, Elysium is as far as two, the very nearest room. If in that room a friend await, felicity or doom. What fortitude the soul contains that it can so endure, the accent of a coming foot, the opening of a door. Ah, nothing screams Emily Dickinson more than making death feel oh so close to you. Immediately after reading this poem, we can already highlight Dickinson's unique writing style. The two stanzas showcase her patented ABCB rhyme scheme, shining imperfectly as always. Along with that, a slant rhyme in the second stanza creates that odd sound in our ears and makes me just want to change the word endure to rhyme with door. These choices help amplify the hidden meanings within the poem. Now, discussing what the poem actually means, the first line describes her explanation of this place Elysium being close to us. Now, I, for one, had no idea what the word Elysium meant. So after a quick Google search, we can see that, okay, Elysium, a section of the underworld in Greek mythology? Again, why not just use heaven or even hell? Why choose this place of Greek mythology? This was no accident. This strange place that people would have no connections to expands on the mysteries that surround death and the afterlife. Dickinson brings to attention the uncertainty we have with death and pounces on our minds to actually think about what happens in the end. The next line references death looming over us wherever we are. The very nearest room. Dickinson wants to make us truly feel how our dying and our lives intertwine. The third line and fourth line can combine into one statement, creating the cause for Elysium being so near. This nearby room houses either felicity or doom. Felicity, in this situation, represents life, and doom represents, although I bet you already know, death. Interestingly, Dickinson uses the word friend to describe these states of life or death. This unknown friend, again, accesses that uncertainty of death. However, using the word friend creates a special bond between ourselves in this state of life and death. Friend personifies the end, as if we've already known what death really is, yet don't actually know its name. This second stanza represents a question from Dickinson, asking how the heck can people be okay with not thinking about their demise? The first two lines illustrate Dickinson's surprise at people being relentless and completely close to the thoughts of our mortality. Then the next two lines add to this relatableness that Dickinson tries to create between us and that state of life or death. She talks about the accent of a coming foot, the opening of a door. Listen, we all remember that time when we're supposed to be asleep, and we know we're supposed to be asleep, but we're still wide awake. Then you hear the sounds of footsteps coming up to your bedroom door. And so you hide under the covers and put out your best fake sleeping performance. You can almost always tell who actually opened the door. Dickinson tries to illustrate the situation about that friend we have in the nearby room. That's a stressful situation to be in. But Dickinson highlights that fact that people often don't care about this person approaching their rooms. They pay no heed to the looming threat that approaches them, even though they can recognize its familiar footsteps. As I mentioned previously, this poem also follows Dickinson's ABCB rhyme scheme with a touch of slant rhyme. After dissecting the meaning behind her words, the rhyme scheme slant rhymes adds to her complete her sentiment. The rhyme scheme again creates that imbalance in that poem. She wants us to feel uncomfortable about death, but in the same breath, she urges us to look past the feeling and actually acknowledge death in our lives. Sure, it's not fun to talk about, but it's necessary. Then, the last stanza has that slant rhyme. This slant rhyme again creates that uneasy feeling and forces us to look at ourselves. When I read that stanza, I ask myself, do I really acknowledge death in my own life, or do I pay no heed? The slant rhyme places emphasis on Dickinson's thoughts about the human spirit. This represents the true goal of Emily Dickinson. She wants us to see the world as she does and try to understand how acknowledging death can improve our lives. All in all, Emily Dickinson is a fantastic poet. While her life was surrounded by death, her writings have inspired me to look at my life and change. I don't think about death as much as I should. I take living for granted and don't truly appreciate the amazingness that comes with life. Dickinson shows to me that we should be terrified of death, yet that doesn't mean we should push death out of our lives. Instead, we should use dying as a motivation to better live our lives. We need to embrace and accept our mortality. Knowing your time in this world is finite sparks a flame in your heart to spend that time as best as you can. I hope you too take these words to heart. Read some more Emily Dickinson. Thanks for watching.